Michael Thompson thought he was looking at a simple accounting error when he saw the $2 million transfer from the police pension fund to Mayor Jackson's private account. 3 hours later, Detective Martinez was found dead, and Michael realized he wasn't dealing with corruption. He was staring at murder covered up with stolen money. Stories like Michael's are happening right now in your town, your state, your country. Justice System USA brings you the real heroes who fight corruption when no one else will. Subscribe to join our community of truth seekers, the trusted banker. Michael Thompson had spent 15 years building trust in Riverside, Texas. As the manager of Community First Bank, he knew every family's financial story, every business struggle, and every dream that required a loan to become reality. At 42, Michael had earned a reputation for fairness, discretion, and unwavering integrity in a town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Riverside was the kind of place where Friday night high school football games brought the entire community together, where the local diner served as an unofficial town hall, and where people still believed their elected officials genuinely cared about their welfare. With a population of just over 25,000, it was large enough to have its own police force and city government, but small enough that corruption seemed impossible to hide. Michael lived in a modest 2-story house on Maple Street with his wife Jennifer, a 3rd-grade teacher at Riverside Elementary, and their 2 children, Emma, 16 and preparing for college, and Jake, 12 and obsessed with baseball. Their life was comfortable but not extravagant, the kind of middle-class stability that defined their community. The bank itself was a cornerstone of Riverside's economy. Community First held the accounts for virtually every city department, the police pension fund, the fire department budget, the school district's operational expenses, and the municipal accounts that Mayor Robert Jackson managed with apparent skill and transparency. Michael took pride in serving as the financial steward for institutions that kept his community safe and prosperous. Mayor Jackson had been in office for 8 years, winning re-election easily based on his reputation for fiscal responsibility and community development. He was a tall, distinguished man in his mid-50s who spoke passionately about Riverside's future and had successfully attracted new businesses to the area. Michael had always respected Jackson's leadership and appreciated his straightforward approach to municipal finance. What Michael didn't know was that his trust in both his community's leadership and the systems he managed was about to be shattered in ways that would threaten not only his career, but his life. The anomaly. Friday evening, October 13, 2023, began like any other for Michael Thompson. He was conducting his weekly review of major account activity, a routine practice that helped him stay informed about the bank's largest transactions and identify any unusual patterns that might require attention. The police pension fund was one of the accounts Michael monitored most carefully. The fund represented the retirement security of every officer who had served Riverside, and its management required strict oversight to ensure that contributions were properly invested and distributions were handled according to legal requirements. As Michael scrolled through the week's transaction history, one entry made him pause: a transfer of exactly $2 million from the police pension fund to an account listed as R. Jackson Municipal Development. The transaction was dated that morning and appeared to have been processed automatically through the bank's electronic transfer system. Michael frowned at his computer screen. He was familiar with all of the city's authorized accounts, and while Mayor Jackson did have legitimate municipal accounts for various city projects, Michael couldn't recall approving any automatic transfer privileges between the pension fund and mayoral accounts. Such transfers typically required multiple signatures and advanced authorization. He pulled up the account documentation for both the pension fund and Jackson's municipal development account. According to the records, the transfer had been authorized under an emergency municipal borrowing provision that Michael had never seen before. The authorization appeared to bear the signatures of Mayor Jackson, Police Chief William Rodriguez, and the city treasurer, but something felt wrong. Michael had been managing these accounts for years, and he knew that emergency borrowing from pension funds required not only multiple signatures, but also city council approval and advance notification to the bank. None of those safeguards appeared to have been followed. Michael picked up his phone and dialed Detective Carlos Martinez, his high school friend who now handled financial crimes for the Riverside Police Department. If anyone could help him understand whether this transfer was legitimate, it would be Carlos. "Carlos, it's Mike Thompson at the bank. I've got a question about a transfer from the police pension fund that seems a little unusual. Could you take a look at it when you get a chance?" "Sure, Mike. What kind of transfer?" "$1 million to one of the mayor's accounts. It's authorized, but I don't remember setting up the automatic transfer privileges. Maybe I'm forgetting something, but I'd feel better if you could verify it's all proper." Carlos was quiet for a moment. $2 million. That's a big chunk of the pension fund. "Yeah, let me look into it. I'll swing by the bank around 8 tonight after my shift. Can you stick around?" "Of course, I'll be here." Michael spent the next few hours trying to convince himself that he was overreacting. Mayor Jackson had always been scrupulous about municipal finances, and there could be a perfectly reasonable explanation for the transfer. Perhaps it was related to a new development project that required immediate funding, or maybe it was a temporary borrowing arrangement that would be reversed within a few days. But as he reviewed more of the account history, Michael began to notice other irregularities that he had previously overlooked. Smaller transfers from various city accounts to different accounts bearing Mayor Jackson's name, deposits that seemed unusually large for a small-town mayor's legitimate business activities, patterns that individually might seem normal but collectively suggested something more troubling. At exactly 8 o'clock, Carlos Martinez arrived at the bank. He was a stocky man in his early 40s with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who had seen too much of humanity's darker side. He and Michael had remained close friends since high school, bonding over their shared commitment to serving their community in different but important ways. "All right, Mike, show me what's got you worried." Michael led Carlos to his office and pulled up the transaction records on his computer. As Carlos reviewed the transfer details, his expression grew increasingly serious. "Mike, this doesn't look right. Emergency borrowing from pension funds requires approval from the city council and advance notification to the state. I don't remember any council meetings about this, and I sure as hell wasn't consulted about using police pension money for municipal development." Carlos continued examining the records, and his frown deepened. "Look at these authorization signatures. I know Chief Rodriguez's signature, and this doesn't look right. The date stamp also seems off. It shows the authorization was created yesterday, but the transfer happened this morning. That's not how our approval process works." Michael felt his stomach drop. "So you think this transfer wasn't legitimate?" "I think we need to investigate this very carefully. If someone is stealing from the police pension fund, that's a federal crime, and if the mayor is involved." Carlos trailed off, considering the implications. "What do you want me to do?" "Don't say anything to anyone else about this yet. Let me do some digging on our end. I'll check with Chief Rodriguez about these signatures and see if there are any records of authorization for this transfer. Can you pull together a report showing all the recent activity on city accounts? I want to see if this is part of a pattern." Michael nodded. "I'll have everything ready by Monday morning." Carlos stood up and shook Michael's hand. "Thanks for calling me, Mike. If this is what I think it might be, you may have just uncovered something really big." As Carlos left the bank, neither man could have predicted that it would be the last conversation they would ever have. The silence. Michael arrived at work Monday morning, expecting to hear from Carlos about his investigation. Instead, he was greeted by his assistant manager Patricia Wang, who looked pale and shaken. "Mike, did you hear about Detective Martinez?" Michael's blood ran cold. "What about Carlos? He was killed Saturday night. They're saying it was a robbery gone wrong. He was found in his car near the old industrial district with his wallet and gun missing." Michael sank into his chair, struggling to process what Patricia had told him. Carlos had been investigating the pension fund transfer, and now he was dead less than 48 hours later. The coincidence seemed impossible to ignore, but Michael tried to convince himself that he was reading too much into the situation. "Do they have any suspects?" Michael asked. "Not that I've heard. Chief Rodriguez held a press conference yesterday, saying they're treating it as a robbery that escalated to violence." Carlos apparently surprised the thief while getting out of his car. Michael spent the rest of the morning in a daze, trying to focus on his normal responsibilities while his mind raced with questions and fears. Had Carlos discovered something that got him killed? Was Michael now in danger for having initiated the investigation? Should he contact other authorities about the pension fund transfer? By lunchtime, Michael had made a decision. He called the FBI field office in Austin and asked to speak with someone who handled financial crimes. After explaining that he was a bank manager who had discovered what appeared to be unauthorized transfers from municipal accounts, he was connected with Special Agent Rachel Torres. "Mr. Thompson, you mentioned unauthorized transfers from city accounts. Can you give me more details?" Michael explained about the pension fund transfer, his conversation with Carlos Martinez, and Carlos's subsequent death. Agent Torres listened carefully, asking specific questions about the timing of events and the amounts involved. "Mr. Thompson, I need to ask you to be very careful about who you discuss this with. If Detective Martinez was killed because of what he was investigating, then you could be in danger as well. I'm going to drive down to Riverside this afternoon to meet with you. Can you gather all the relevant account records and have them ready for me?" "Of course, but should I be worried about my family's safety?" "I think you should take reasonable precautions. Don't discuss this investigation with anyone except me, and be aware of your surroundings. We'll know more after I review the evidence you've collected." Michael spent the afternoon printing account records and transaction reports, trying to appear normal while feeling increasingly paranoid about every person who entered the bank. When Mayor Jackson walked through the front door at 4:30 p.m., Michael's heart nearly stopped. "Michael, how are you holding up after the terrible news about Carlos Martinez?" "It's been a shock to all of us. Carlos was a good man. Indeed he was. You know, Carlos and I had been discussing some city financial matters recently, and I wanted to make sure there weren't any loose ends that might cause confusion. Have you had any questions about recent city account activity that I could help clarify?" Michael forced himself to remain calm. "Nothing that can't wait. Mr. Mayor, I know you're dealing with a lot right now. Mayor Jackson studied Michael's face for a moment longer than seemed natural. Well, if anything does come up, please don't hesitate to call me directly. We want to make sure all of our municipal finances are handled smoothly, especially during this difficult time. After Jackson left, Michael realized that the mayor's visit wasn't coincidental. Somehow, Jackson knew that Carlos had been investigating the pension fund transfer, and he was trying to determine how much Michael knew. The implication was terrifying. If Jackson was involved in Carlos's death, then Michael was definitely in danger. Quick question while Michael's story unfolds. What would you do if you discovered your boss was stealing? Would you speak up or stay silent? Comment below and let's discuss. The investigation deepens. Special Agent Torres arrived at the bank Tuesday morning, dressed in a conservative business suit that helped her blend in with the typical bank customers. She was a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a nonsense demeanor that immediately put Michael at ease. Mr. Thompson, I've reviewed the preliminary information you provided over the phone, and I believe you've uncovered a significant financial crime. Before we proceed, I need to explain that this investigation will need to remain completely confidential. If word gets out that we're investigating Mayor Jackson, it could compromise our ability to gather evidence and could put you in serious danger. Michael handed her the folder of account records he had prepared. I understand. What exactly are we dealing with here? Agent Torres spent nearly an hour reviewing the documents, occasionally asking Michael to clarify specific transactions or explain the bank's normal procedures for handling municipal accounts. As she worked, her expression grew increasingly grim. Mr. Thompson, what you've discovered appears to be systematic embezzlement from multiple city accounts over a period of at least 2 years. The total amount stolen appears to be between $8 and $10 million. Michael felt dizzy. $10 million. How is that possible? The transfers were small enough individually to avoid triggering automatic oversight, but frequent enough to drain significant funds over time. The pension fund transfer you initially noticed was unusual because it was so large. Whoever authorized it was probably getting desperate and taking bigger risks. Agent Torres continued examining the records. Look at this pattern. Every transfer coincides with deposits into various accounts controlled by Robert Jackson. Some are in his name, some are business accounts for companies he owns, and some appear to be shell accounts that exist only on paper. But how could he get away with it for so long? Municipal oversight in small towns is often inadequate. City councils typically trust their mayors to handle day-to-day financial operations, and they don't always have the expertise to spot sophisticated embezzlement schemes. Jackson probably counted on no one looking too closely at the details. Agent Torres closed the folder and looked directly at Michael. The question now is how to proceed. We need more evidence to build a solid case, but we also need to be careful not to alert Jackson that he's under investigation. Detective Martinez's death suggests that Jackson is willing to use violence to protect himself. What do you need me to do? Continue operating normally, but document everything Jackson does with city accounts. If he makes any more unusual transfers or tries to access accounts in ways that seem suspicious, I need to know immediately. We're also going to start monitoring his other financial activities and looking into his associates. Agent Torres handed Michael a secure phone. Use this to contact me if anything urgent happens. Don't use your regular phone or email for anything related to this investigation. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael found himself living in a state of constant anxiety. He tried to maintain his normal routine at work and at home, but he was constantly watching for signs that someone was following him or that Mayor Jackson suspected he was under investigation. The evidence continued to accumulate. Agent Torres discovered that Jackson had been using stolen city funds to make payments to various individuals and businesses that appeared to be connected to drug trafficking organizations operating along the Texas-Mexico border. The mayor wasn't just embezzling municipal funds, he was laundering money for cartels and using city resources to facilitate drug trafficking. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Chief Rodriguez was receiving monthly payments from Jackson in exchange for ensuring that certain areas of the city weren't heavily patrolled. The city treasurer had been falsifying budget reports to hide the missing funds. Even some city council members were receiving kickbacks for approving development projects that served as fronts for money laundering operations. But the most disturbing discovery was evidence suggesting that Carlos Martinez had been killed not by random robbers, but by professional assassins hired to eliminate him before he could expose the corruption. Phone records showed that Jackson had made several calls to known criminal associates in the hours before Carlos's death. Asterisk the net closes. 3 weeks after Michael first contacted the FBI, Agent Torres informed him that they were ready to move forward with arrests. Federal agents had been quietly gathering evidence and coordinating with state authorities to ensure that all aspects of the criminal organization could be dismantled. Simultaneously, we're going to execute search warrants and make arrests this Friday morning, Torres explained during a secret meeting at a restaurant outside of Riverside. We'll hit Jackson's house, his offices, and several businesses connected to the money laundering operation. We'll also arrest Chief Rodriguez and the other city officials who were involved. Michael felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. What about my family's safety? If Jackson figures out that I was the one who exposed him, we've been monitoring Jackson's communications, and we have reason to believe he's planning to flee the country this weekend. He knows that something is wrong, probably because he's noticed increased federal activity in the area and he's trying to get out before he's arrested. We need to move quickly. Will you need me to testify? Eventually. Yes, your testimony about the initial discovery and your knowledge of the bank's procedures will be crucial for securing convictions, but we'll make sure you and your family are protected throughout the process. Friday morning arrived with unseasonably cold weather and gray skies that matched Michael's mood. He arrived at work early, knowing that by the end of the day his quiet life in Riverside would be forever changed. At exactly 6 a.m., federal agents simultaneously raided Mayor Jackson's home, his city office, and the offices of 3 businesses that had been serving as fronts for money laundering. Jackson was arrested while trying to board a private plane at a small airfield outside of town, carrying a suitcase containing $500,000 in cash and false identification documents. Chief Rodriguez was arrested at his home, along with the city treasurer and 2 city council members who had been receiving kickbacks. The coordinated operation netted 12 arrests in total, including several individuals connected to the drug, a trafficking organization that had been using Riverside as a base of operations. By noon, news of the arrests had spread throughout the community, sending shockwaves through a town that had prided itself on honest government and civic virtue. Michael found himself at the center of a media storm as word leaked that the bank manager had provided the evidence that brought down the corruption ring. The reckoning. The trial of Robert Jackson and his co-conspirators began 6 months later and lasted for 3 weeks. Michael testified for 2 full days, explaining how he had discovered the unauthorized transfer and detailing the evidence of systematic embezzlement that he had helped uncover. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Financial records showed that Jackson had stolen nearly $12 million from various city accounts over a 4-year period. Phone records and surveillance footage connected him to known drug traffickers and money laundering operations. Most damning of all, DNA evidence and witness testimony proved that Jackson had ordered the murder of Detective Carlos Martinez. Jackson was ultimately convicted on charges including embezzlement, money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Chief Rodriguez received a 30-year sentence, and the other co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years. The stolen money was largely recovered and returned to the city accounts from which it had been taken. The police pension fund was fully restored, and additional safeguards were implemented to prevent future embezzlement. The drug trafficking operation that had been using Riverside as a base was dismantled, leading to dozens of additional arrests throughout Texas and Mexico. But the personal cost to Michael and his family was significant. The publicity surrounding the case made it impossible for them to remain in Riverside, where some residents blamed Michael for destroying the town's reputation and bringing unwanted federal attention to their community. Death threats from associates of the drug trafficking organization forced the family to relocate under federal witness protection. Michael eventually found work as a financial consultant helping other small communities strengthen their oversight of municipal accounts and prevent the kind of corruption that had flourished in Riverside. His experience had taught him that trust, while essential for community cohesion, must be balanced with transparency and accountability. The legacy. 2 years after Jackson's conviction, Michael returned to Riverside for the dedication of a memorial to Detective Carlos Martinez. The bronze plaque installed outside the police station honored Carlos as a dedicated officer who died protecting his community from corruption and violence. Riverside had slowly begun to heal from the scandal. A new mayor and city council had been elected on a platform of transparency and reform. The city had implemented new financial oversight procedures and had hired an independent auditor to review all municipal expenditures. Property values, which had plummeted during the trials, were beginning to recover, but the scars remained visible. Several families had left town, unable to cope with the stigma of having been associated with the corruption. The police department had struggled to rebuild trust with residents who had lost faith in law enforcement. The economic development that Jackson had touted as one of his achievements had largely evaporated when investigators revealed that many of the new businesses had been fronts for criminal activity. During the memorial service, Chief Rodriguez's replacement, Chief Maria Santos, approached Michael to thank him for his courage in exposing the corruption. "I know it cost you a lot to speak up," she said, "but what you did saved this community. We might not have recovered from another few years of that kind of corruption." Michael looked at the memorial plaque bearing Carlos's name and thought about the price of doing the right thing. Carlos had paid with his life. Michael's family had been forced to give up their home and start over in a new place. Numerous city employees had lost their jobs when their departments were restructured, but hundreds of police officers would retire with their pensions intact. City services would be funded by tax dollars instead of drug money. Children would attend schools whose budgets weren't being secretly drained by corrupt officials, and other Detective Martinez's in other small towns might be safer because the precedent had been established that financial crimes would be investigated and prosecuted, no matter who was involved. As Michael drove away from Riverside for what he knew would probably be the last time, he reflected on the lesson he had learned, that ordinary people in ordinary jobs sometimes find themselves in positions where they must choose between their personal safety and their moral obligations. The choice isn't always easy, and the consequences aren't always fair. But the willingness to make that choice when it matters is what separates communities that thrive from communities that decay. Michael Thompson had been just a bank manager trying to do his job correctly. But when faced with evidence of corruption that was literally killing people in his community, he had found the courage to risk everything for the sake of justice, not because he was a hero, but because he understood that silence in the face of evil is complicity, and that the price of looking the other way is always higher than the cost of speaking up. The small-town banker who trusted everyone had become the man who proved that trust must be earned, verified, and protected through vigilance. And in a country where corruption often flourishes in the shadows of institutions that citizens assume they can trust, Michael's story serves as a reminder that justice often depends on ordinary people finding extraordinary courage at precisely the moment when it matters most. Michael proved that one person can make a difference. Want to meet more everyday Americans who chose justice over safety? Hit subscribe for new Justice System USA stories every week.